The sun blazed mercilessly across the Montana Territory as Harriet Cooper clutched the doctor's letter in her trembling hands. The words blurred through her tears, but their meaning remained cruelly clear. After 5 years of marriage and countless prayers, the physician had confirmed what the town gossips had long speculated: she would never bear a child. Whispers followed Harriet through Silverwater like shadows at dusk, growing longer and darker with each passing day. She held her head high as she made her way through town, ignoring the pitying glances and not-so-subtle murmurs that trailed behind her like the dust kicked up by wagon wheels. Poor William Cooper, Harriet overheard Mrs. Thornton say to the general store owner as she pretended to examine a bolt of calico. Married to a barren woman with no prospect of an heir. What's the point of building anything if you've no one to leave it to? Harriet's cheeks burned, but she maintained her composure, carefully placing the fabric back on the shelf before exiting the store with measured steps. Only when she reached the empty alley between buildings did she allow herself to lean against the rough wooden wall, struggling to catch her breath as tears threatened to spill. "You all right, madam?" The deep voice startled her. Harriet hastily wiped her eyes and turned to find a tall stranger watching her with concern etched across his sun-weathered face. She hadn't seen him before, which was unusual in a town as small as Silverwater. "Perfectly fine," she replied stiffly, smoothing her skirts. "Just catching my breath in the shade." The man nodded, though his eyes a striking shade of blue that reminded her of mountain lakes held skepticism. "Heat can be mighty oppressive this time of year." He tipped his hat. "Hudson Evans, madam, just arrived in town yesterday." "Harriet Cooper," she replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving her name. The last thing she needed was another person learning of her shame. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Cooper." His gaze lingered on her face a moment longer before he gestured toward the main street. "I should be on my way. Hope your day improves." Harriet watched him walk away, his tall frame moving with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work in open spaces. She noticed the worn leather chaps over his denim trousers, the well-used boots, the way he carried himself unmistakably a cowboy, likely looking for work at one of the nearby ranches. By the time Harriet reached her modest home at the edge of town, she had pushed thoughts of the stranger from her mind. Her husband, William, would be returning from his carpentry shop soon, and she needed to prepare supper. Their marriage had grown increasingly strained with each passing year that produced no children, and William had taken to spending more evenings at the saloon than at home. As she chopped vegetables for stew, Harriet couldn't help but wonder if the doctor's letter would be the final blow to their already fragile union. William had been clear from the beginning he wanted sons to carry on his name and inherit the business he was building. A barren wife served no purpose in that vision. The sound of the front door slamming announced her husband's arrival. "William," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper will be ready shortly." When no response came, she ventured into the front room to find him slumped in a chair, hat pulled low over his eyes, the distinctive smell of whiskey hanging about him like a cloud. "You've been drinking," she observed quietly. "What of it?" he muttered, not looking up. Harriet took a deep breath. "The doctor's letter came today." William's body tensed. "And it's as we feared. He says there's little chance I'll ever conceive." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, William pushed his hat back and looked at her, his once kind eyes now clouded with resentment. "So that's it then," he said flatly. 5 years wasted. His words cut deeper than any physical blow. "William, please. What's the point?" "Harriet." He rose suddenly, pacing the small room. "Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, who will it go to? What's the point of all this struggle if there's no future, no legacy?" "We are still husband and wife," she whispered. "We could still build a life together." William laughed bitterly. "A life with no purpose, no children to raise, just the two of us growing old with nothing to show for it." He grabbed his hat. "I need some air." "You just got home," Harriet protested, but the door had already closed behind him. Alone in the silent house, Harriet allowed her tears to fall freely. She had known this day would come eventually, had dreaded it for years. Now that it was here, the pain was even worse than she had imagined. When William didn't return for supper, Harriet wasn't surprised. When he didn't come home that night, she told herself he needed time. When 3 days passed with no word, the truth became impossible to ignore. Her husband had abandoned her. On the fourth morning, a knock at her door roused Harriet from her grief. She opened it to find Sheriff Taylor standing uncomfortably on her porch, hat in hand. "Mrs. Cooper," he began gently, "I'm afraid I have some news about William." The words that followed barely registered through Harriet's shock. A bar fight in a neighboring town. A knife. William, drunk and reckless, had provoked the wrong man. By the time the doctor arrived, it had been too late. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cooper," the sheriff concluded. "His body is being brought back today for burial." Harriet nodded mechanically, thanked the sheriff, and closed the door. She stood in the center of her home, now hers alone, feeling strangely hollow. She had lost her husband twice in 1 week, first to his disappointment, then to death. The days that followed passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and condolence calls. The townspeople who had whispered behind her back now approached with sympathetic smiles and platitudes about God's mysterious ways. Harriet accepted their words with quiet dignity, never revealing that William had left her before his death. 2 weeks after the funeral, Harriet sat at her kitchen table, facing the harsh reality of her situation. The small amount of money William had left wouldn't sustain her for long. His carpentry shop would have to be sold, but that would only provide temporary relief. As a woman alone in 1878, her options were severely limited. A knock at the door interrupted her grim calculations. Opening it, she was surprised to find Hudson Evans standing on her porch, hat in hand. "Mr. Evans," she said, instinctively smoothing her hair, "this is unexpected." "Mrs. Cooper." He nodded respectfully. "I heard about your husband. I'm mighty sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she replied automatically. "I also heard you might be selling his carpentry shop." "Ah, so that was it. Business." "Yes, I am. Are you interested?" Hudson shifted his weight. "Not exactly, madam. I'm a rancher by trade. Just purchased the old McAllister place north of town." Harriet knew the property, 300 acres of decent grazing land with a dilapidated house and barn. It had been empty for years after old McAllister died without heirs. "I'm in need of furniture," Hudson continued, "and repairs to the house. I was hoping to purchase some of your husband's finished pieces and perhaps hire you to help me outfit the place properly." "Hire me?" Harriet repeated, confused. "I understand you assisted your husband in his business, kept the books, managed customers, that sort of thing." Harriet was surprised he knew this. Few in town acknowledged her contributions to William's success. "Yes, I did." "Then you'd know the value of his work and what might be needed for a home." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I'm willing to pay fair wages for your expertise." Harriet hesitated. The offer was unexpected but potentially providential. Still, propriety had to be considered. "It wouldn't be appropriate for a widow to work alone with a bachelor, Mr. Evans." Hudson nodded. "I understand your concern. My sister Hazel will be joining me once the house is habitable. Until then, we could meet at the shop with the door open, in full view of the town. No one could question your reputation." Harriet considered the proposal. The money would help postpone difficult decisions, and the work would be a welcome distraction from her grief and uncertainty. "Very well, Mr. Evans. I accept your offer." "Hudson, please," he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. "If we're to be working together." "Hudson," she agreed, finding herself returning his smile despite everything. The following morning, Harriet met Hudson at William's shop. The familiar smell of sawdust and varnish brought a lump to her throat as she unlocked the door. She hadn't been back since before William's death. "Your husband was skilled," Hudson observed, running a hand over a partially completed rocking chair. "This is fine workmanship." "Yes, he was talented," Harriet agreed, pushing away memories of happier times when she would bring William lunch and find him lost in his craft, wood shavings in his hair, and contentment on his face. They spent the morning cataloging completed pieces and discussing what Hudson needed for his ranch house. His practical approach helped Harriet focus on the task at hand, rather than dwelling on her loss. "The house needs everything," Hudson explained. "McAllister was a bachelor who lived simply. There's a table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame that looks like it might collapse if you sneeze near it." "How large is the house?" Harriet asked, making notes. 4 rooms, kitchen, parlor, and 2 bedrooms. Nothing fancy, but solid. The barn needs more work than the house, truth be told. And it's just you and your sister? For now, he nodded. Hazel's 18, just finished her schooling back east. Our parents passed 3 years ago, and she's been staying with an aunt while I established myself. You're quite young to be purchasing your own ranch, Harriet observed. Hudson smiled. 26 isn't so young. I've been working cattle since I was 14, saved every penny. The war and hard times made land prices drop. Right place, right time, I suppose. As they worked, Harriet found herself warming to Hudson's straightforward manner. He spoke thoughtfully, listened attentively, and treated her with a respect she hadn't experienced from many men in town. By midday, they had agreed on several pieces for immediate delivery, and a list of items Hudson would commission. The work would keep Harriet occupied for weeks, possibly months. I can pay half now, Hudson said, counting out bills from a leather wallet. The rest upon delivery. That's more than fair, Harriet replied, surprised by his generosity. As Hudson was leaving, Mrs. Thornton and her daughter passed by the shop, their curious gazes lingering on the open door. Harriet stiffened, knowing gossip would spread by supper time. Hudson seemed to notice her discomfort. Let them talk, he said quietly. You're a businesswoman conducting business. There's no shame in that. Harriet appreciated his words, though she knew the reality of small-town life. A widow spending time with an unmarried man, regardless of the reason, would set tongues wagging. Sure enough, when Harriet visited the general store the following day, she overheard whispers cease abruptly as she entered. Mrs. Thornton and her friend Mrs. Jenkins exchanged meaningful glances. "Good morning, ladies," Harriet said pleasantly, determined not to show her discomfort. "Mrs. Cooper," Mrs. Thornton replied with exaggerated sympathy. "How are you managing, dear? Such a tragedy, losing William so suddenly." "I'm managing well enough, thank you." "I noticed you've reopened the shop," Mrs. Jenkins commented. "That's quite progressive of you." "I'm helping Mr. Evans furnish his new home," Harriet explained, keeping her tone neutral. "He's purchased the McAllister property." "Ah, yes, the Cowboy," Mrs. Thornton said with a sniff. "Quite fortunate for you to find employment so quickly." The implication was clear in her tone, and Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Evans has been very respectful and professional." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Jenkins patted her hand condescendingly. "Though one wonders what William would think, his widow working for a single man." "I believe William would want me to survive," Harriet replied evenly, though her heart pounded. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to purchase supplies." Over the following weeks, Harriet threw herself into work. She arranged for the delivery of finished pieces to Hudson's ranch, supervised the loading of the wagon, and even ventured out to the property once to ensure everything was properly placed. Hudson's sister Hazel had not yet arrived, but the ranch hand who helped with deliveries provided an appropriate chaperone. The ranch house was simple but sturdy, and Harriet could see the potential in it. Hudson had been making repairs, new shingles on the roof, repaired porch steps, fresh whitewash on the exterior walls. Inside, the floors had been scrubbed, windows washed, and the few pieces of furniture arranged to make the most of the space. "It's coming along," Hudson said, watching her assess the parlor. "Still needs a woman's touch, but Hazel will help with that when she arrives next month." "It has good bones," Harriet agreed. "An excellent light." She moved to the window, gazing out at the rolling grassland that stretched to distant hills. "The view is magnificent." "That's what sold me on the place," Hudson admitted, coming to stand beside her. "First time I rode up that hill and saw this valley, I knew this was home." Something in his voice made Harriet turn to look at him. The afternoon sun caught his profile, illuminating the quiet contentment on his face as he gazed out at his land. She felt a sudden, unexpected pang in her chest, not grief for William, but something more, like longing for a peace she hadn't known in years. Conscious of their proximity, Harriet stepped back. "I should return to town before dark." Hudson nodded, seemingly unaware of her momentary discomfort. "Of course. I'll have Mike drive you back." As the weeks passed, Harriet's work for Hudson expanded beyond just furnishing the house. She found herself advising on kitchen supplies, linens, and other household necessities. Each interaction reinforced her growing respect for him, He never dismissed her suggestions or treated her as less than an equal partner in their business arrangement. In town, however, the gossip continued unabated. Harriet heard the whispers in church, noticed the glances in the mercantile, felt the judgment weighing on her like a physical burden. The fact that her friendship with Hudson Foret had become a friendship, despite her efforts to maintain professional distance, coincided with the anniversary of her failed attempts to conceive, made the situation even more painful. Imagine if she had given poor William children, she overheard Mrs. Thornton saying one Sunday after service. At least he would have had heirs to remember him by. Now there's nothing left of him but a barren widow who's already caught another man's eye. The words stung more than Harriet wanted to admit. She hurried away before anyone could see her distress, but not before Reverend Matthew's wife noticed her expression. Later that afternoon, a knock at Harriet's door revealed Mrs. Matthews standing on her porch with a basket of fresh-baked goods. "I thought you might enjoy these," the kind woman said. "And perhaps some company?" Over tea and warm bread, Harriet found herself confiding in the minister's wife about the gossip and her growing friendship with Hudson. "People will always talk," Mrs. Matthews said gently, "especially when they don't understand. Your situation is difficult. A young widow making her own way challenges their notions of how women should behave. I'm simply trying to survive," Harriet sighed. "And there's nothing improper about your business with Mr. Evans?" "Nothing whatsoever," Harriet assured her. "He's been nothing but respectful." Mrs. Matthews studied her thoughtfully. "And your feelings for him?" Harriet nearly dropped her teacup. I don't have feelings for him. It's strictly business." The older woman smiled kindly. "It's not a sin to find happiness again, Harriet. William has been gone 6 months now. Life continues, even after loss." "It's not that simple," Harriet whispered. "Even if I did have such feelings, which I don't, what could I offer him? A man wants children, heirs to carry on his name and work. I can't provide that." "Not all men measure a woman's worth by her ability to bear children," Mrs. Matthews replied gently. "Some value companionship, partnership, love." Harriet shook her head. "William couldn't." "William wasn't all men," Mrs. Matthews said, reaching across to squeeze Harriet's hand. "Just as you are not all women. Each of us carries our own dreams and measures of happiness." After Mrs. Matthews left, Harriet found herself reflecting on their conversation more than she wanted to admit. Had she developed feelings for Hudson? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Even if she had, what future could there be? She had already failed one husband by being barren. She wouldn't subject another man to the same disappointment. The arrival of Hudson's sister Hazel in early October brought a welcome change to Harriet's routine. The vivacious 18-year-old was delighted with Harriet's work on the ranch house and immediately sought her advice on adding feminine touches to the rustic dwelling. "Hudson described you as practical and efficient," Hazel said during their first meeting, her green eyes twinkling. "He failed to mention how pretty you are." Harriet blushed. "Your brother was being professional, as was I." "Oh, I'm sure," Hazel replied with a knowing smile that made Harriet wonder exactly what Hudson had said about her. With Hazel's arrival, Harriet found herself invited to the ranch more frequently. The presence of another woman eliminated any concerns about propriety, and soon Harriet was spending at least 1 day a week at the Evans ranch, helping Hazel settle in and continuing to advise on household matters. She tried to maintain a professional distance from Hudson, but it became increasingly difficult. She found herself noticing things the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gently he treated his horses, his patience when teaching the ranch hands new skills. More than once, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. As autumn deepened toward winter, Harriet realized her work for Hudson was nearly complete. The house was fully furnished, the kitchen well stocked, and Hazel was becoming comfortable managing the household. Soon, there would be no reason for her regular visits to the ranch. The thought left her with an unexpected emptiness. Over the past months, her trips to the Evans ranch had become the brightest spots in her week. Returning to her solitary existence in town, facing the whispers and judgment alone, seemed unbearable. "You're quiet today," Hudson observed as they sat on the porch one crisp November afternoon. Hazel was inside preparing supper, and the setting sun bathed the valley in golden light. "Just thinking," Harriet replied, pulling her shawl tighter against the cooling air. penny for those thoughts?" She smiled faintly. "I was just realizing that our business arrangement is nearly complete. You and Hazel are well established now." Hudson studied her for a long moment. "Does that mean you won't be visiting anymore?" "There wouldn't be much reason to," she said carefully. "You've paid for all the furnishings. The house is in order. And if I asked you to continue visiting, not as a business arrangement, but as a friend?" Harriet's heart fluttered traitorously. "I'm not sure that would be wise." "Because of the gossips in town?" His voice held an edge of irritation. "I've heard the whispers, Harriet. People with empty lives filling the void with speculation about others." "It's not just that," she admitted. I've come to value our friendship, Hudson. More than I should, perhaps." He turned to face her fully. "Why shouldn't you value it? I certainly do. Because friendship between a widow and a bachelor inevitably leads to assumptions and expectations. Expectations I cannot fulfill." She took a deep breath. "You know I cannot have children." Hudson's expression softened. "Is that what's troubling you? Shouldn't it? A man in your position building a ranch, establishing a life here needs heirs to carry on what you've created. I can't provide that." For a long moment, Hudson said nothing, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains turning purple in the fading light. "When I was 20, he finally said, I worked a cattle drive from Texas to Kansas. The trail boss was an older man named Thomas Rodriguez, toughest, wisest man I ever met." Hudson shifted in his chair. "One night, we got to talking about family. I asked why he never had children of his own. Harriet listened, curious where this story was leading. He told me his wife couldn't bear children, said when they found out, she offered to leave him so he could find a woman who could give him sons." Hudson's eyes found hers. "Know what he told her?" Harriet shook her head. "He said, 'Then I'll build a life that doesn't need an heir.'" Hudson leaned forward. They traveled together, built a successful ranch, took in orphan children from time to time, taught dozens of young cowboys the trade. When he died, he left his ranch to a young couple who had worked for him for years. "That's a lovely story," Harriet said softly. "It's more than a story. It's a different way of thinking about legacy." Hudson reached over and gently took her hand. "There are many ways to make a mark on this world, Harriet. Having children is just one of them." The warmth of his hand around hers sent a tremor through Harriet's body. William didn't see it that way. "I'm not William," Hudson said simply, "and I care for you, Harriet, more than as a friend or business associate." Harriet felt tears prick her eyes. "You can't mean that." "I've never been more certain of anything." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I'm not asking for an answer today. Just think about it. Consider a future that might look different from what you've imagined, but could still be filled with purpose and joy." Before Harriet could respond, Hazel called them in for supper. The moment passed, but Hudson's words echoed in her mind throughout the evening and on her ride back to town. Could she truly believe him? Was it possible to build a meaningful life, a happy marriage without children? William's rejection had cut so deeply. She had convinced herself no man would want a barren wife. Yet Hudson seemed sincere. As winter settled over Montana territory, Harriet continued her visits to the Evans ranch, though less frequently due to weather and road conditions. Each visit reinforced her growing feelings for Hudson and her fondness for Hazel, who had become like the younger sister Harriet had never had. Christmas approached, bringing with it an invitation to spend the holiday at the ranch. Harriet accepted, her heart lighter than it had been in years at the prospect of celebrating the season with people who genuinely cared for her. The day before Christmas Eve, Harriet was packing items for her stay when another knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Mrs. Thornton standing on her porch with an artificial smile. "Mrs. Cooper, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Harriet replied cautiously. "Please come in." Mrs. Thornton swept into the small house, her gaze taking in the packed valise on the table. "Going somewhere for the holidays?" "I've been invited to spend Christmas at the Evans Ranch," Harriet answered, keeping her tone neutral. "How interesting." Mrs. Thornton removed her gloves deliberately. "That's actually why I've come to speak with you." Harriet steeled herself. "Oh? As a concerned Christian woman, I feel it's my duty to address the rumors circulating about your relationship with Mr. Evans." Mrs. Thornton's expression was pious, but her eyes gleamed with malice. "People are talking, Harriet. It's been barely a year since poor William's passing, and already you're frequently seen in the company of another man." "My relationship with Mr. Evans is entirely proper," Harriet said firmly. "Perhaps in your eyes, but consider how it appears to others." Mrs. Thornton adjusted her hat pin. "And now, spending Christmas at his ranch? Really, Harriet, have you no concern for your reputation?" "His sister will be present, as will the ranch hands," Harriet replied, her patience wearing thin. "There is nothing improper about accepting their hospitality." Mrs. Thornton sighed dramatically. "I'm simply concerned for you, dear. After all, what can come of such an association? Mr. Evans is establishing himself, building a future. He'll want children eventually, all men do, and we all know you can't provide that." The cruel words landed exactly as intended, reopening the wound that had barely begun to heal. Harriet struggled to maintain her composure. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Thornton, but my personal life is not open for discussion." Harriet moved toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make." After Mrs. Thornton left, Harriet sat heavily at her table, the woman's words echoing painfully. Despite Hudson's assurances, doubt crept back in. Was she being foolish? Would Hudson eventually resent her inability to bear children, as William had? By the time she arrived at the Evans ranch the next day, Harriet had composed herself, though Mrs. Thornton's visit had left a shadow over her anticipation of the holiday. Hudson noticed her subdued mood immediately. "Something's troubling you," he said as they walked from the barn to the house, her valise in his hand. Harriet hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Mrs. Thornton paid me a visit yesterday. She felt it necessary to warn me about the impropriety of spending Christmas here, and to remind me of my shortcomings as a woman." Hudson's jaw tightened. "That woman has a heart colder than a Montana winter." "She believes she's acting from Christian charity," Harriet sighed. "And she's not entirely wrong. People are talking." "Let them talk," Hudson said firmly. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." "It's not just the gossip," Harriet admitted. "It's the reminder of what I can't give you. Children, a family." Hudson stopped walking and set down the valise. Taking her gloved hands in his, he looked directly into her eyes. "Harriet Cooper, when will you believe that I care for you exactly as you are? I don't want you for what you can give me. I want you because of who you are, your kindness, your intelligence, your strength." "You say that now," Harriet whispered, "but years from now, when other men are surrounded by their children and grandchildren, then I'll count myself blessed to have spent those years with the woman I love," he replied simply. "Besides, who's to say we can't have a family in other ways? There are orphans who need homes, young people like Mike who need mentoring. Family is what we make it, Harriet." The conviction in his voice nearly broke her resolve. "I need time, Hudson, to be sure." He nodded, releasing her hands. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Christmas at the Evans Ranch proved to be the happiest Harriet had experienced in years. Hazel had decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons. The scent of cinnamon and baking bread filled the kitchen. And even the ranch hands joined in the celebrations with music and storytelling. On Christmas morning, after a hearty breakfast and the exchange of modest gifts, Hudson asked Harriet to join him for a ride. "There's something I want to show you," he explained, helping her onto a gentle mare. They rode for about 20 minutes, following the curve of the creek that bisected the property until they came to a small rise overlooking a sheltered valley. There, to Harriet's surprise, stood the framework of a new structure. "What is this?" she asked as Hudson helped her dismount. "The future," he replied with a smile. "Come see." He led her through what would become a small but comfortable home, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor with large windows facing the mountains. "I started building it 2 months ago," Hudson explained. "I work on it when time allows." "But why?" Harriet asked, confused. "You already have a house. That house belongs to the ranch. This," he gestured around them, "this could be ours, if you want it to be." Harriet's breath caught. "Hudson, I'm not asking for your answer yet," he said quickly. "Just showing you possibilities, a home we could build together, a life of our own making." As they stood in what would become the parlor, sunlight streaming through the open framework, Harriet found herself imagining a future she had thought forever, closed to her. Not a life defined by what she lacked, but one built around what she and Hudson could create together. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Just like you," he replied, his eyes holding hers. The weeks following Christmas brought heavy snows that made travel between town and the ranch difficult. Harriet found herself missing Hudson and Hazel more than she had anticipated, their absence highlighting the emptiness of her life in town. She used the enforced isolation to consider Hudson's unspoken proposal. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that her fears were rooted not in doubt about Hudson's sincerity, but in her own sense of inadequacy, a feeling William had nurtured with his disappointment and abandonment. By the time February arrived with a brief thaw that made the roads passable, Harriet had made her decision. She arranged for the stagecoach to take her to the Evans ranch, her heart both terrified and exhilarated by what she planned to do. Hazel's delighted welcome made Harriet smile, but it was Hudson's expression when he saw her that confirmed she had made the right choice. His face lit up with a joy so genuine it took her breath away. "I didn't expect to see you until the spring thaw," he said as they sat in the kitchen, Hazel discreetly making herself busy in the pantry to give them some privacy. "I couldn't wait that long," Harriet replied. "I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas, about possibilities." Hudson's gaze intensified. And I believe you," she said simply. "I believe that you care for me as I am. I believe that we could build a life together that's meaningful and joyful, with or without children." The hope in Hudson's eyes was almost painful to witness. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying yes," Harriet smiled through sudden tears. "Yes to the house by the creek. Yes to a future of our own making. Yes to you, Hudson Evans." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He took her hands in his touch gentle yet firm. "Harriet Cooper, you've made me the happiest man in Montana Territory." "There will still be talk," she warned. "People who don't understand." "Let them talk while we live," Hudson replied. "Their opinions matter far less than our happiness." Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the valley and preparations for a May wedding. Reverend Matthews would perform the ceremony at the ranch, with Hazel as Harriet's attendant and Mike standing up for Hudson. Not everyone in town approved of the match, especially given that it had been just over a year since William's death. The whispers continued, but Harriet found they bothered her less and less as her wedding day approached. Hudson's confidence was contagious, and Hazel's enthusiastic support further bolstered her resolve. 3 days before the wedding, Harriet was arranging her few possessions for the move to the ranch when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she was surprised to find Mrs. Thornton standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Cooper," the older woman nodded stiffly. "May I come in?" Wary but curious, Harriet gestured her inside. "I understand congratulations are in order," Mrs. Thornton said, removing her gloves. "Your wedding is this Saturday." "Yes," Harriet confirmed, "though I don't recall sending you an invitation." Mrs. Thornton had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, you didn't, and perhaps that's warranted given our last conversation." Harriet waited, saying nothing. "I've come to apologize," Mrs. Thornton continued, the words clearly difficult for her. "I spoke harshly to you, out of concern, but also," she hesitated, "out of jealousy, if I'm being honest." "Jealousy?" Harriet repeated, surprised. Mrs. Thornton sighed. "You're young, Harriet, beautiful. Even without children, you found a man who values you enough to make you his wife. My Eleanor is 23 and hasn't received a single proposal, despite my best efforts." The admission stunned Harriet. Mrs. Thornton had always seemed so confident, so certain of her place in town society. "I'm sorry about Eleanor," Harriet said carefully, "but that doesn't excuse the cruelty of your words to me." "No, it doesn't," Mrs. Thornton agreed, "which is why I've come to make amends, and to give you this." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. A wedding gift. Hesitantly, Harriet accepted it. Unwrapping the tissue, she found a delicate lace handkerchief with her soon-to-be initials, H.E. embroidered in one corner. "It's lovely," Harriet said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "My grandmother carried it at her wedding," Mrs. Thornton explained. She too was told she would never bear children, yet she had my mother at 40, after 20 years of marriage. Harriet looked up sharply. Are you saying? I'm saying doctors aren't always right, Mrs. Thornton replied. But more importantly, I'm saying that your worth isn't determined by your ability to bear children. It took me too long to learn that lesson myself. She straightened her shoulders. In any case, I wish you happiness in your marriage, Mrs. Cooper. Truly. After Mrs. Thornton left, Harriet sat holding the handkerchief, reflecting on how life could surprise you when you least expected it, not just with hardships, but sometimes with unexpected grace. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the mountains sharp against a perfect blue sky. Harriet dressed in a simple gown of ivory silk, not white, as befitted a widow, but not the somber colors she had worn since William's death either. Hazel arranged wildflowers in her hair and presented her with a bouquet of prairie roses and blue columbine. You look beautiful, Hazel said, eyes shining. Hudson won't know what hit him. The ceremony took place in the meadow near the half-built house by the creek. A small group had gathered the ranch hands, Reverend and Mrs. Matthews, a few friends from town, including, surprisingly, Mrs. Thornton and her daughter. Even the mercantile owner and his wife had come, perhaps more out of curiosity than goodwill, but Harriet was beyond caring about their motives. As she walked toward Hudson, who waited beneath an arch of spring branches, Harriet felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. His face as he watched her approach held everything she had ever hoped to see: love, respect, anticipation of their shared future. Reverend Matthews spoke of commitment, partnership, and building a life together. When it came time for vows, Hudson took Harriet's hands in his and spoke from the heart. Harriet, I take you as my wife, promising to walk beside you through whatever life brings. I vow to build with you a home filled with love, respect, and purpose. I promise to value what we create together above any conventional notion of legacy or success. Where others see limitation, I see possibility. Where others measure worth in heirs, I measure it in the happiness we create each day. Tears blurred Harriet's vision as she responded with her own vows, pledging to believe in their shared vision and to trust in the future they would build together. As Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Hudson pulled Harriet close for a kiss that sealed their promises and silenced, at least for that moment, every whispered doubt that had ever plagued her. The celebration continued into the evening, with music, dancing, and a feast prepared by Hazel and the ranch cook. As twilight fell, Hudson led Harriet away from the gathering, toward their partially constructed home. I have something to show you, he said, guiding her through the framework to what would be their bedroom. There, to her surprise, stood a completed piece of furniture, a beautifully crafted cradle. Harriet's breath caught. Hudson, before you misunderstand, he said quickly, this isn't an expectation. It's a symbol. He ran his hand along the smooth wood. I made this to show you that our future holds all possibilities. Maybe someday it will hold our child biological or adopted. Or maybe it will become an heirloom passed to those we mentor and love as family. Either way, it represents hope. Tears filled Harriet's eyes as she touched the cradle. It's beautiful. Just like the life we're going to build, Hudson replied, drawing her into his arms. Together, as the stars appeared above the open rafters of what would become their home, Harriet rested her head against Hudson's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. For the first time in years, she felt complete, not because she had overcome her inability to bear children, but because she had found a man who saw her value beyond that limitation. In that moment, under the vast Montana sky, Harriet knew that the whispers would eventually fade, the judgments would lose their power, and what would remain was the life she and Hudson created together, a life built on love, mutual respect, and the understanding that legacy takes many forms. And if the cradle remained empty of their own children, it would still be filled with meaning, a testament to a love strong enough to defy convention and build happiness on its own terms. 1 year later, Harriet stood on the porch of their completed home, watching Hudson work with a young orphan boy named Thomas, whom they had taken in 6 months earlier. The 10-year-old had been living with the church after losing his parents to influenza, and when Reverend Matthews mentioned the boy needed a stable home, Hudson and Harriet had exchanged a single look before offering to take him in. Thomas wasn't legally their son, Adoption laws were complicated, especially for a child old enough to remember his birth parents, but he had flourished under their care, helping with ranch chores, learning carpentry from Hudson, and filling their home with boyish energy. "He's got a natural way with horses," Hudson observed as he joined Harriet on the porch, watching Thomas lead a yearling colt around the paddock. "Reminds me of myself at that age," Harriet smiled. "He reminds me of you now, patient, gentle, but firm." Hudson slipped an arm around her waist. "Having him here has been good for all of us." "It has," Harriet agreed, "though I must say, I didn't expect our family to grow quite so quickly." Hudson's hand moved to rest gently on her slightly rounded belly. "Neither did I." The discovery of her pregnancy 3 months earlier had been a shock that left Harriet trembling between joy and fear. Dr. Wilson in town had been as surprised as she was, reminding her that medicine wasn't an exact science and that sometimes the body healed in unexpected ways. "Are you still worried?" Hudson asked softly. "A little," Harriet admitted. "The doctor said the risk of losing the baby is still high, given my history." "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," Hudson assured her. "We already have a family, you, me, Thomas, Hazel, when she visits. This little one will be a blessing if they join us, but our happiness doesn't depend on it." Harriet leaned into his embrace, marveling at how different life was from what she had imagined 2 years ago. The town gossips had long since moved on to other targets. Though Mrs. Thornton occasionally visited, her initial jealousy transformed into a genuine, if somewhat formal, friendship. "I was thinking," Hudson said as they watched Thomas succeed in getting the colt to follow him without a lead rope, "that we might take in another child or two, regardless of whether this pregnancy succeeds. The orphanage in Helena is overcrowded, according to Reverend Matthews." Harriet looked up at him. "You wouldn't mind? Having a house full of children who don't carry your blood?" Hudson's blue eyes met hers with the same certainty she had come to rely on. "Blood doesn't make a family, Harriet. Love does. Besides," he smiled, "what better legacy than helping young lives find their way? That seems like a fine inheritance to me." As the sunset painted the valley in gold and crimson, Harriet felt the baby move within her, a flutter like butterfly wings. Whether this child survived to birth or not, she knew that she and Hudson had already built something precious and enduring, a home where worth wasn't measured by conventional standards. A family defined by love rather than bloodlines. A legacy that would live on in the lives they touched. They had built, just as Hudson promised, a life that didn't need an heir to be complete, but had room for as many children as love could hold. And in the end, that was the most valuable inheritance of all.